Okay, we're in central Nevada. We're on our way up to Lunar Crater. We're actually along the extraterrestrial highway 375. And this is the basin and range, so there's grabens and horsts. So the grabens are the down drop blocks, and we're standing in a down drop block, kind of like Death Valley, though not as deep. And the ranges, the mountains behind me are a range, and they're the horst. That's the upthrown block on the fault. And during the glacial climate, during the glacial periods, when there were ice sheets in eastern and midwestern United States, this region had what's known as the pluvial period, meaning pluvial means rain. It had a very rainy climate. Now it's all dry, now it's all desert, but back during the Pleistocene, during the ice ages, this region was a very rainy climate. And so these alkali lake beds, like the ones you see behind me and the one I lectured on in Badwater, they're basically dried up remnants of glacial lakes. And as we drive along 375, I looked at a map quickly. To be quite honest, I don't know what valley I'm in, but there's in the neighborhood, as described on the internet and everything else, there's Reveille Valley and Railroad Valley. I might be in one of those two. And these were pluvial lakes. They were not necessarily all that deep. However, there was Glacial Lake Lahontan, which occupied almost I would say a quarter of the state of Nevada at the time. And I think it connected, if I do recall correctly, it connected all the way to Glacial Lake Bonneville, which is in near Salt Lake City. So there was an entire network of these lakes. Down this far south in Nevada, the lakes were pretty isolated, not quite as deep, but I know that Railroad Valley and Reveille Valley each had a glacial lake, and they had a shoreline. And I'm going to show you, there's behind you, the way in the direction that I'm looking, is an alluvial fan coming off the mountains, and the alluvial fan ends here, and I'm going to walk up. When I'm done talking, I'm going to walk up to the edge of where it ends, but it ends abruptly, and what it ends abruptly is probably a shoreline to the lake. In other words, the alluvial fan was worked by the lake shoreline, and so a lot of these basins in Nevada the geologists have come out, the Pleistocene geologists, and some of them have mapped Pleistocene, lacustrine, meaning lake, shorelines. So I'm going to walk to where I think the shoreline was and show you where that is. It's basically a berm, kind of a drop in elevation. This slope is the alluvial fan behind me, and as you walk out, as we start approaching the alkali flat ahead of me here, and you saw in the background when I was talking, you get to this area and suddenly there's a pretty steep change in slope right here, right about here. And as you can imagine, with lake shorelines and wind and everything else, that there would be wave action. And what you look for these shorelines is pebbles and wave sorted beach deposits, and you can actually find those. I don't see any right now, but I suspect I'm on a fairly high ground. It then drops off pretty abruptly, and that's it. And then the rest of this is probably, so this would have been like probably the depth of the lake all the way across to the other side of the valley here, and what's left is the salt flat now that the lake has dried up. So okay, I don't really see any boulder pavement here, which is like the wave wash beach terrace kind of thing. But this line here might be the actual shoreline, a couple of more feet down. There's definitely mud cracks on the ground, so this was inundated with water and then dry, and then inundated with water and then dried. And that could have been after the period of lake, I don't know. But it would make sense if this was the washed shoreline beach here, and it would occasionally be dried, and so it's leaving a series of mud cracks. But you'll notice that this is a fairly distinct pattern that parallels the axis of the valley. You can run it in this direction. You can see that it continues, but mostly in this direction over here. You can see that there's a fairly flat, terracey looking drop. Mainly in this direction, you can kind of see that there's a flat, and then it drops, and then flat again. I think that's the beach terrace.
Okay, so here's the area that I was walking on. It looked kind of like a wave wash platform, looking down on the ground. Looked like a little sorted gravel. And not what I mean by boulder pavement is the fines get washed away and you're left with coarse boulders, and they tend to be lined up along the edge of the shoreline where the wave action was. And I don't see the boulder pavement, but I do see gravel that was probably washed back and forth by the water, and this is up on a berm. And you can see off in the distance the vegetation changes a little bit as you drop down onto the flat and then ultimately get down to the level of the salt. So this is the view there. And now I mentioned in the field Glacial Lake Lahontan, and I said that it occupied maybe a quarter of Nevada. Well, at least the interconnected network of Lahontan. There's other named lakes in that system, but you can see up in the northwestern part of Nevada, again, Nevada is here, the bend in Nevada is there, with California all over on this side. Up here is Oregon, over here is Idaho, and then over here is Utah. And these glacial lake systems were interconnected. You can see here there's a stream of some kind connecting these lakes, and this connectivity, I think, extended all the way over to the Glacial Lake Bonneville, which is mapped in Utah. So let's find a little bit about Glacial Lake Bonneville. Backing out a little bit, here's the entire state of Nevada and the entire Great Basin region. Salt Lake City, Utah is here, and this is what's left over of Glacial Lake Bonneville. And now, one of the reasons that I have the habit of throwing the word glacial lake when I'm talking about pluvial lakes is that Glacial Lake Bonneville was in fact a glacial lake because there were glaciers on its eastern margins that were coming down out of the Wasatch Range. So the Wasatch Range is a set of mountains east of Salt Lake City, Utah. Has the ski hills like Park City, Utah, and Alta, Snowbird. Those mountains are the Wasatch Mountains, and you're going to have some slides from the top of the Wasatch Mountains when I was out there for my field camp in 1985 and captured some photos of overlooking the Great Salt Lake and give you a sense of the basin range and the extent of these lakes and how big they must have been. So here is from the shoreline of this Great Salt Lake. I did one time walk the beach, took a trip down to just check it out, the new area of the country, hadn't been there before, so I walked the beach. Tons of brine flies. That's what I remember about the beach. Brine flies everywhere, but somebody was bold enough to do some windsurfing out there. So this is the Great Salt Lake from a beach near Salt Lake City. When you get up on the Wasatch Range and you look, this is the view that you get. It's absolutely beautiful, and of course this is why Brigham Young got to the top of the mountain here, Bountiful Peak, and he looked out over the lake. This is it. I think he said that before he realized that is highly concentrated salt. It's actually more concentrated than the ocean. But the deal is Glacial Lake Bonneville at the time of the pluvial period was, deep enough. It was more than likely a freshwater lake, and very deep. So maybe Brigham Young meant that this is the place back in the Pleistocene. Probably was the place back in the Pleistocene. So this is the view looking westward from the top of the Wasatch Range over the Great Salt Lake. So giving it a panorama, this is the view to the southwest. This is the view to the south, and you can see over here the Bingham Copper Pit, which is the largest copper mine in the world, open pit mine. That's across the Salt Lake Valley from Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City, the southern part of Salt Lake City, is down below you here. with the Great Salt Lake to your right. And to the right, looking more straight west rather than southwest, west-southwest anyway, you see the southern end of the Great Salt Lake. And then lastly, looking due west, you see this. This is another turn to the right, and you see this due west. Now, what's interesting about Glacial Lake Bonneville is that this is from the Mormon church complex. They have a series of buildings. I think I was in the genealogy library. The Mormon church is famous for doing genealogy, and they have a genealogy library on their campus. So this is from the window, I think, of the genealogy library, and we have an indication of the depth of Glacial Lake Bonneville by very broad evidence of a wave cut platform, which is the actions of the waves cutting a bench essentially into the side of the mountains and leaving a beach deposit. And I'm going to trace this out for you, and this is well documented. So we know that the water level was above the dome of the Capitol in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is staggering. This is one of the things, probably the biggest thing that I like about geology, is it leaves you with an understanding of reality that staggers the mind. That we used to have a lake that had a beach cut platform right up here. You can trace this around. This platform is over here, goes over the salt dome, goes around through this ravinement, comes back around this side over here, goes, I don't know how far up this channel, up that ravine, but it comes around the corner here and runs across the top of the mountain here. And that is a wave cut platform. You can actually see some of the beach deposit right there. That is left by Glacial Lake Bonneville to a depth of, I think it was over 600 feet deep. Greater than the depth of the Great Lakes. So I took the liberty to look up that fact and consulted the Oracle, which is Google, and here is the elevation and depth of Glacial Lake Bonneville. At its greatest extent, the lake stood at the elevation 5,090 feet, nearly 1,000 feet higher than the current level of the Great Salt Lake. So the lake was over 1,000 feet deep, if you count the depth of today's Salt Lake. That's staggering, deeper than the Great Lakes. I think the deepest, at least Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan, I think the deepest is 600 to 700 feet in the northern part of the lake. So very deep freshwater lake at the time.